In this exciting episode, we remember the good old days of grafting. You know, when elegant bachelors wearing bottleneck glasses and ridiculous walrus mustaches robbed you with a touch of chivalry. They just don't make the grafters as gallant as they used to, do they? It's Perry Mason, Season 3, Episode 15, The Case of the Gallant Grafter. Welcome to the Perry Pod. I'm your humble host, Jonathan Searcy. My purpose here, pretty simple, provide an audio companion to the greatest legal drama in television history, Perry Mason. I plan to do an episode of every episode of the television series, and as time permits, I'll get to some of those made-for-TV movies too. I'll be working through the series in the order in which the episodes were aired. Each episode, I give you a brief refresher on the plot and compare it with Earl Stanley Gardner's novel, if it was an adaptation. Next, I list some key pieces of trivia before I tackle the episode's theme. We'll feature a Perry Proverb, a pearl of wisdom from the man himself, before we head to a post-case water cooler where, just like Perry, Della, and Paul, we can discuss the ins and outs of their adventures. But first, to the law library! Each episode in the law library, we investigate some legal conundrum in the episode so we can find fresh precedents for future cases. This trip to the law library, we concern ourselves with the legal and financial entanglement of divorce when you happen to be the head of a company and your spouse wants out.
He's in financial trouble. You can help him out if you'd release his money.
Oh, that's out of the question.
It will be helping the company too, Mrs. Nelson.
I'm sure it will. I don't know any company or any person that can't be helped out with money.
Figuring out what happens to a business during divorce really depends on the state you live in, that state's marital property rules, and the value of your company. What does California law say? Well, Cali is a community property state, so if you acquired property or started a business during your marriage, it's equally owned by both spouses unless there was some prior agreement. Section 2550 of the Family Code requires the community estate to be evenly divided upon separation. So without a prenup, the court's going to review the marital estate and order a 50-50 division. All this means that no one gets to touch the business's finances so they can pay off that missing $112,000 because the business is as much Sylvia's as it is Edward's. On that happy note, let's get to the plot of this episode. The Case of the Gallant Grafter. In case you thought that's an iffy title, here were the working titles for this Cy Salkowitz penned episode. The Case of the Prudent Debtor, The Case of the Doubtful Debtor, and The Case of the Busman's Holiday? Your guess is as good as mine on that last one. We open with a mysterious man opening a bank account.
You will receive in excess of $20,000 each week during January. By the second day of February, my balance will exceed $100,000.
Meanwhile, in L.A., a marriage falls apart. Connection? Edward Nelson isn't having much luck with his wife Sylvia, and she's playing hardball. She's got a takeover plan if Edward won't give her a divorce.
You gave me a block of Nelson Company stock when we were married 4 years ago.
What about it?
There's going to be a stockholders meeting the end of this month. I'm going to give my proxies to Frank Avery.
You know Avery and I are having a fight over control. Your proxies might swing it for him.
Yes, I know.
Edward suspects foul play. His own business partner, played by John Stevenson.
But so much can happen between now and the board meeting, Nelson. By the way, how's the divorce going? I understand your wife is asking for a tidy financial arrangement. think I'll stick around.
Your tricks won't do you any good. So why don't we make this as painless and pleasant as possible?
Oh, when the time comes, I will.
Meanwhile, Philip Terry appears again as Robert Doniger, an unctuous man with unkept hair, a 5 o'clock shadow, and a man who gets the attention of Norma Williams, a nosy secretary, and Patricia Martin, who appears to love him because, well, I'm not really sure. It turns out that Doniger was the mysterious man with the glasses and stash getup. He's apparently a ladies' man too, and now he's got a lot of dough. But as soon as he gets it, there's trouble. First, from Sylvia, who's tied up the business's funds in this divorce settlement so that the missing $112,000 can't be rectified. Uh-oh. Then there's trouble from Norma. She wants in.
Can I talk to you about this later,
Oh,
Norma?
sure, but I just want you to know something. This'll just be our little secret. As long as we have something in common, like all that money, half and half.
Then there's trouble from Patricia.
Oh, Robert, I don't need it. I don't want it. Give it back.
As for Edward Nelson, Doniger's boss, he thinks his partner took the dough, so he consults Perry.
My wife has frozen all my funds. And they will be until we effect a legal settlement.
Let's see if there isn't something we can do. Professional investigation of this mysterious George Livingston might turn up something. I'll want to talk to your accountant, Mr. Doniger.
I set him home early.
Perry wants to talk with Doniger, so he and Della pay him a visit only to find, of course, that Doniger is dead. But you know, in Perryland, a corpse is an occasion for a crowd. So in the side room is Perry's client. And in the open doorway, Frank Avery. Uh-oh.
Who knew you were coming here?
I knew, Mr. Mason. Well, Mr. Mason, aren't you going to call the police?
Okay. Perry starts his defense of Edward by calling on Mr. Siddons, someone who at least superficially appears to be on Edward Nelson's side. Frank Avery floats in with some fantastically snarky comments.
Came back here last night and saw you drafting this letter, so I know what you're doing, Siddons.
I'm still working for Edward Nelson.
Well, you hang on to his coattails, even though they fling you into the gutter.
Then Perry goes on perfume patrol, trying to track down the scent from a glove that was left at the scene of the crime.
I'm trying to identify a scent. I believe this is the name of the perfume, Samadhi.
Oh, yes. A heavenly fragrance. With a very sweet background. Rather oriental.
Sylvia Nelson shows up, and Perry wonders whether or not Robert Doniger was stepping out with her. The cops have the same idea and arrest Edward for murder.
And guess what we discovered in the luggage compartment? $112,000. And something else we discovered. Doniger not only stole your client's money, he also stole his wife.
As the trial opens, we get info about the missing money and this delightful side performance from a gal who's got studies every day of the week.
Miss Ford, how long did you remain in the hall?
Oh, no time at all, because just then my Wednesday steady came and we took off.
Your Wednesday steady?
Well, sure, my steady on Wednesdays.
Perry takes a poke at her, but not hard enough for our carousing witness to notice. The key witness in the trial, Mr. Siddons. He smiles in your face when all the time he wants to take your place. Backstabber.
Mr. Siddons, is it true that you were on Mr. Nelson's side in this controversy with Franklin Avery over control of the Nelson Company?
Well, yes, I was. Of course I was. I still am.
Well, in the event Mr. Nelson is convicted of the murder of Robert Doniger, control of the Nelson Company passes to Mrs. Nelson, does it not?
I don't know. I suppose so.
Isn't that why you didn't mind sacrificing the $112,000? It would go back to the company. When you and Mrs. Nelson were married, it would come right back to you.
That's not true about Sylvia.
Stepping out with your wife? Check. Stepping out with the cash? Check. Oh, man. Here's the confession.
Sylvia had no part in it. I
brought the briefcase to her. I told her how it would work. That she was just to let the law take its course.
Here's Edward Nelson's response in the denouement.
But she wasn't in on the murder.
Except after the fact, Mr. Nelson. And then she jumped in with a vengeance to involve you.
And all the while you were protecting her.
Sorry, Mr. Mason. I should have told you about seeing her in the building.
Now, let's get trivial, shall we? Each episode in the trivia section, I give you 3 takeaways. A Paul is a subject worth investigating more. Adela is something about a particular actor or actress in the episode. And a Perry is something we learn about our intrepid hero. Our Paul for this episode concerns the perfume that Della identifies on a glove near the corpse.
Samadhi.
What's that?
Oh, new perfume. It smells like that anyway.
Incidentally, the word samadhi is a term from both Hinduism and Buddhism. It describes a state of intense concentration achieved through meditation. Our Paul prompt. I have little trust that samadhi was a real perfume. But let's say you were making a list of the best-selling perfumes of 1960. What perfumes would make the cut? Let me know what you find. Our Della for this episode is none other than Virginia Arness, a.k.a. Sylvia Nelson.
I can't see what difference that makes. You're not going to send me a bottle.
Here's 10 about Virginia. Number 1, Virginia Chapman was born in 1921. Number 2, she studied theater at UCLA. Number 3, in 1942, she married Leo Morton and had one child, a son named Craig. That couple divorced in 1947. Number 4, at the Pasadena Playhouse, a company that looms large in the annals of Perrydom, Virginia Chapman met a lanky giant named James Arness. She took to him, became his coach and advocate. They married in 1948. Number 5, James Arness's thoughts on the early parts of his marriage to Virginia are recorded in his autobiography, which all told, pretty skimpy where Virginia is concerned. Quote, determined that I become an actor, my new wife had great faith in my ability and saw potential in me, something that I was blind to myself at the time. I just spent a number of months on the beach, and during that time I hadn't given any serious consideration to the profession. To me, it was all still a lark. End quote. But of course, James' career did take off. In 1955, after starring in a number of films, he landed the role of Matt Dillon in Gunsmoke, a 20-season television phenomenon. And so the couple began to run into problems. Number 6, James Arness did adopt Virginia's son, Craig, and then he and Virginia had 2 more children, Jenny and Rolf. Number 7, as the 50s wore on, Virginia saw James Arness's profile soar, hers not so much. She was in Highway Patrol, Official Detective, and Whirlybird's mid-50s films. She even appeared in an early episode of Gunsmoke alongside her husband and Charlie Bronson. Incidentally, so did daughter Jenny in a later episode. But James Arness had the more lucrative career. It was tough, and when Arness started putting in personal appearances to make extra money, Virginia and he drifted apart. Here's an example of a kind of dispute the two had. So Arness starts hanging out with the Duke himself, John Wayne, and gets invited to take part in a Wayne Fellows group of actors, all men. Now, Virginia Chapman had been instrumental in getting James Arness to be more confident about his acting. She wanted to participate. She confronted John Wayne about it, and Wayne, according to Arness, put Virginia in her place. Arness's reflection on the incident seems to side more with Wayne than Virginia. So, as the 50s wore on, Arness is spending more time filming his show, making personal appearances, and then in 1959, after an international trip, Arness found out that his wife, Virginia, had attempted suicide. Here's what a 1959 article said. Quote, "Jim and I have been married 11 years, Arness told reporters. I've been dependent on him so long, I took this long trip to try to be independent, but the closer I got to home, the more I realized I needed Jim. So I telephoned him from Honolulu, hoping he had a change of heart, but he hadn't. He doesn't want a reconciliation." End quote. It was after this phone call that Mrs. Arness cut her wrists. And when she returned home, here was James Arness's response. He refused to pose for a picture with Virginia, and when the photographer suggested it might help bring a reconciliation, he said it would take a lot more than a picture to smooth things over. So, the pair divorced in 1963. If you can believe this, Arness, in his autobiography, says it's in 1958. I'm not sure which one is right. You would think Arness would know the date of his divorce, but a lot of other documents said 1963. And here's what's even more shocking. James Arness got control. James Arness got full custody of the 3 kids. Number 8. So Virginia moves out to San Bernardino, an area in California that was predominantly inhabited by non-white people. She opens up a small roadside inn there. The reasons for this move, her thoughts on white, rich Hollywood, are captured in a 1967 article she wrote for Ebony magazine. You can find that article in its entirety through Google Books. I'll leave the link in the show notes. The article is super fascinating, 1967, not only as an expose from a former actress about Hollywood's hypocrisy where racial integration is involved, but also as a peek inside of Virginia's thoughts about her failed marriage. She's pictured with her daughter, Ginny, in that article. Number 9, about the kids. Craig, the oldest, the one Virginia had with Leo Morton, eventually became a successful photographer, but he died in his 50s from health complications. Jenny died in 1975 from a sleeping pill overdose. Rolf's still alive. He was the only child to survive both his parents. James Arness died in 2011. Number 10, Virginia herself died in 1977. The coroner ruled the death an accidental overdose of sleeping pills. A tragic end for Sylvia Nelson. Our Perry for this episode concerns our intrepid hero's inability to prioritize food over a case. As Paul and Della plan to accompany Perry for a victorious post-trial meal, all on Edward Nelson's dime, the phone rings. Sal Salkowitz gives us something we've never had before, the promise of a new case before the credits roll.
Well, what if it's a... Hello? Yes, it is. Just a moment, please. Yes, miss.
Note, this kind of shtick was something that came from the first Perry Mason novels, where the client for, say, the case of the sulky girl was sitting in the office as the case of the Velvet Claws ended. Earl Stanley Gardner got rid of it. The producers of the TV show never really replicated it. Our theme for this episode, gallantry. Gallantry, it's the kissing cousin of chivalry. It speaks of a traditional style, something of the gentleman, the man born with grace and dignity. So just how does this episode give us a grafter that's gallant? Well, Doniger isn't a man who's stealing for himself. He's doing it so he can give his woman, Patricia Martin, all the finer things in life.
To give you all the things you've never had.
But I have you.
Don't you see, Pat? Things I'd never be able to give you. I thought we'd wait a while, maybe a year. Then we'd take a trip around the world. See New York, London, Paris, together.
He's actually one of the more sympathetic decedents we've had this season. The case of the classy corpse. Gallantry, it appears, doesn't necessarily earn you long life if you're willing to do some grafting to get your gallant ends. Now, let's hear a Perry Proverb. The law, it's going to take its course. You can bet your sweet samadhi-scented glove on that. So our Perry Proverb from this episode comes from the final confrontation between Perry and our murderer, Mr. Siddons.
I told her how it would work. That she was just to let the law take its course.
That's what's going to happen, Mr. Siddons. The law is going to take its course.
I love it. Perry lets Mr. Siddons know that only evil men try to get the law to do evil on their behalf. Now that Perry's pointed them in the right direction, the officers of the court will dispose of Mr. Siddons, but quick. Now, let's grab a swig from the water cooler.
There is one thing I don't understand.
Go on, Paul.
Each episode in the water cooler, we offer deleted scenes where we imagine some sequences didn't quite make the episode's final cut. Number one, we get to see all the male suspects in the case in Coke bottle glasses and walrus mustaches, putting Perry's assertion to the test.
In that getup, almost anybody would fit.
End result, Frank Avery makes it look cool. Mr. Siddons looks absolutely ridiculous. Number two, Della gets upset that Perry never calls her own perfume haunting. That's a good point. What's more awkward? Perry buying Della some samadhi or not buying her anything after this case is over with all that more than cash? And number three, the Nelson Company meets for the first time after this entire debacle. He trusted Doniger. Bad news, that guy stole the money. Frank Avery is gone. Why was he there in the first place? Nelson obviously wasn't taking care of what he had. And then Siddons, Nelson's right-hand man, was a snake in the grass. The board decides to say farewell to old Eddie Nelson. Now, let's revisit some Paul prompts. My Aunt Myra wrote in to say she appreciated me mentioning her dad, my grandfather, in the case of the wayward wife. My grandfather was a German POW in World War II, and she recalled one time that he told her that when he was coming back to the U.S. after World War II, the Army was looking for volunteers to go to Korea, and he did not want to go. As for the Paul prompt from our last episode, let's see what we can learn about ice skating. Yep, it's 1960. It was certainly a thing. My dad, Aunt Myra, listener Tom, all contributed to our Paul prompt answer. The long and short of it, Fred Pike, if he had played his cards right, could have made good cash had he managed to stay healthy. The famous ice extravaganza Ice Capades was nearly 20 years old when the 1960s began, but this era was the most colorful and innovative in the show's history. In 1960 and 61, Ice Capades featured skating stars Asia Zenova, Kathy Steele, Phil Romaine, Bobby Specht. 1960 Olympic pair champions Barbara Wagner and Bob Paul. There was Kathy Machado, Ronnie Robertson. They made a successful trip to Moscow in 61. It was one of the top touring shows in the world. Listener Tom adds that Sonia Henney, who was a huge figure skating star, was still appearing in Hollywood movies like Hans Brinker and the Silver Skates from 1958, also starring Tab Hunter. So that would have been in the public's mind. Several listeners pointed out that in 1961, Sabina Flight 548, which was carrying the 1961 U.S. World Team to the World Figure Skating Championships in Prague, crashed 45 minutes outside of Brussels. The entire team died. I had no idea. Well, we've been getting more letters from our listeners, which delights me to no end. Longtime listener Tim Cree writes in and says, with the case of the prudent prosecutor, we continue our Perry Mason trend of casual handling of firearms, but we step it up a notch as the defendant actually shoots himself over a grudge. I've known many people I didn't care for in life, but none so much that I'd shoot my own leg over it. It's also nice to see this side of Berger. We've seen the future respect in the courtroom, but this takes it further. I really appreciate that aspect of the story. Thanks, Tim. Dennis also wrote in to say the same thing. I love this episode. He writes, Perry saying, I'll defend him, Hamilton, even if he did save your life. And Berger telling the prosecutor to sit down and shut up when he would have made the same objection under other circumstances. It brings up how the relationship between Mason and Berger hasn't been consistent at times. Berger seems to see Mason as unethical. Other times they seem friendly and have meals together, usually on Mason's dime. Lee Marvin writes in to say, I'm finding that most of these season 3 episodes I don't remember seeing before. I was really excited about this one. Seeing Hamilton root for Perry to beat the DA makes this my favorite episode to date. And then we got a note from lawyer Tom Wiltshire, who wrote in to say that he appreciated the law library. He's a lawyer. It gives him a quick refresher course from law school. He made a very interesting point about the sleazy private detectives that often occupy Perry's world and made a recommendation that I rank the show's sleazy PIs worst to best. I'll have to take that into consideration. Finally, we got a heartfelt note from Perry Mason maven Nancy. She writes, thanks for the info on Bill Tallman. I may have told you this before, but in case I haven't, I credit him with keeping me from smoking and probably saving my life. I was 8 when his PSA on smoking aired, and it made a big impact on me. I've never smoked, even though it was very popular when I was growing up. I'm prone to lung issues. I believe that if I had smoked, I might not be here today. So when I say Tallman probably saved my life, I mean it. Another comment on the episode, we have a tendency to think of Berger as incompetent, but this is one of those times when they remind us that he was really interested in justice. There are other episodes where even Perry mentions that his adversary is on the side of justice. It's nice to see, and their friendly banter in this episode is cute, and when Trag figures out they're working together, that's good for a laugh. As for which episode to use to tell us about Barbara Hale, I would suggest The Case of the Weary Watchdog. That one is a tour de force for her. Great thought, Nancy. Again, if there's an episode you think that would be best for me to do a deep dive on Raymond Burr, William Hopper, Barbara Hale, let me know. As always, I'd love feedback about this particular episode of the podcast in general. Was there something you'd like to comment on or correct? You can email me at theperrypod@gmail.com. All of our episodes are available via Spotify, YouTube, and iTunes. Join us next time as we go from a sympathetic decedent, Robert Doniger, to a corpse who is so despicable that in life he's disposing of a body in the episode before he gets his just desserts. It's the case of the weary wildcatter. Until then, this is Jonathan Searcy saying, keep on walking that Park Avenue beat!